revolutionary left movement that was coordinating with another group in Argentina, which were seen as their brother group, called ERP, el Ejército Revolucionario del Pueblo, the People's Revolutionary Army of Argentina, as well as the Tupamaros in Uruguay, kind of leftist urban guerrilla, as well as the the ELN in Bolivia, because one kind of secret chapter there is that the People's Revolutionary Army of Argentina kind of helped rebuild Che's old guerrilla in Bolivia. So these four groups had been already coordinating with each other, and as in each one of these countries, like a coup would come, or there would be more repression to the left, many of these different groups would go into Chile. Chile was sort of like their base of operations, and sort of that has something that is sort of like the reason why when Pinochet got into power, it was kind of his interest to create a kind of transnational repressive operation, because revolutionaries were coordinating with each other. Mir was getting weapons from the ERP from Argentina. The ELN was getting training from the ERP in Argentina. Tupamaros, they were very good at bank robberies, and as well as kidnapping millionaires, such as Pepsi CEOs and whatnot. And they would send money to Mir, or money over to ERP, and ERP would also do that. ERP was really known for doing this, so much so that Pepsi made an actual office for them to negotiate kidnappings. This is a common thing that kept on going. So, when Chile fell, it was kind of like the big base of operations fell. And it was at that moment in which many of these groups started proclaiming that they would do kind of like a revolution throughout all of the Andes, such as what Che had been talking about before, just 5 years before. You have to think that for us it's 50 years ago. For them it was right there. So this is the reason why for Pinochet it was important for him to kind of create this coordination, because in Chile it's very easy for someone just to, if you live in the south of Chile, to slip into Argentina. You just slip in and out as much as you want. So that would be a reason why they had to coordinate with the Argentinian dictatorship there, or the counter-revolutionary forces over there, because Argentina had their coup a little bit later, kind of a couple. It was 1 or 2 years after that they had the coup on Perón's wife, and pretty much this wasn't a perfect marriage the whole way through, so to say. There would eventually be cracks within the relationships between each one of these governments. For example, in the case of Chile, we had a almost war with Argentina in around 1979, which was called El Conflicto Beagle, or the Beagle Conflict. Basically, it was a conflict for some islands in the most southern tip of South America. At the end, the Argentinians decided not to attack, and they decided to engage in a war to reclaim the Falkland Islands. And their loss of that war sort of ended up concluding the end of the Videla regime in many ways. So it wasn't always a perfect marriage in this case. There would be tensions between these countries, and but either way, this whole process of counter-revolution, this whole counter-revolutionary operation was key in destroying a lot of what was the most revolutionary elements of in the most revolutionary organizations within Latin America. In the case of Chile, with Mir, well, at first, Pinochet was more concerned in destroying Allende's party, was shattering it into pieces, the Partido Socialista. Because of that, Partido Socialista divided into 12 parts, and today it's sort of a big far cry from what it used to be under Allende. With Mir, they really pounded them into the dirt. The grace of Mir was that even though they would constantly be pounded into the dirt, they would always rise like a phoenix. They would eventually rise once again and again and again until the end of the dictatorship. I'd say 1979 would be the key year in which there would actually be fissures within these counter-revolutionary governments. In the case of Chile, it's when many of the revolutionary parties and organizations would come back to Chile to start organizing for the upcoming uprisings that would mark the 80s here. I would say it's also like close to the years in which kind of more revolutionary processes would pop up in other countries as well. And I'd say with the case of the consequences of the Operación Condor, well, you have the obvious consequence of which thousands and thousands of families were just utterly decimated. You'd have some cases in which entire families, people's entire families would just poof. You'd never hear of them, or like many years later, like the whole nuclear family would be destroyed. You have people who still are looking for their loved ones, and you also have the case here in Chile, and this also happens in Argentina, in Bolivia as well, but I know more of the details because I live here. Here in Chile, you have kind of not only amnesty, but you have comfort for the criminals who did these things. So what do I mean by comfort? The people who have been arrested for this, for such as Manuel Contreras or I forget his name. He was another very important figure within the Pinochet's secret police, DINA. They are all kept in a place called Punta Peuco, which is supposed to be a prison, but in reality, it's more like a luxury hotel for anything. For being a prison, it's more like a luxury hotel. They have these nice beds. They get very high tier healthcare. They can have phone calls as much as they want. They don't have to pay anything. Like if you're in the US, you get thrown into prison. You have to sort of like scrape the floor for pennies to get phone calls for your family. No, they can go on the phone all day long. They have strong relationships with generals. Many of their children of the people who are in Punta Peuco are high-ranking military members of the Chilean military right now. And this happens also in Argentina. You have people who are if they got arrested, they have a kind of a luxury sentence. And this is something that people kind of really really resent, because the arguments are that from the right is that, well, if we make it too cruel for these poor old grandpas, uh, maybe there'll be less of these poor grandpas who would be willing to speak about their crimes. We've had a few cases in which there's been people who've had such immense regret that they have decided to turn themselves into the luxury prison. There was one case of one member of one armed forces member who he killed a priest. And at the moment in which he was going to kill the priest said, "Come, look at me, son. Look at me in the eyes." And the guy kind of asked, "Why? I'm going to kill you." And he said, "Look at me in the eyes so I can give you, para que te puedo dar el perdón, so I can forgive
Wow.
you." And it was because of that moment that this member of the armed forces sort of like he held it in for that whole time. You had some cases in which people like, sort of to say, they came to their senses and did and turned themselves in, but in many cases, no. In many cases, our transitions to democracy weren't they were in the words of one of our presidents, President Elwin, a la medida de lo posible. So that would be democracy as much as possible, uh,
Mm.
transition as much as possible, justice as much as possible. So a lot of countries sort of try to whitewash their transition and say, "Oh, this was a great transition. There was no blood." But just because there
Right.
was no blood doesn't mean that there was justice.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, no,
I don't.
I think that's a great breakdown, man. Wow, that's crazy. And I think a good point that you hit on is the fact that a lot of these armies in South America, in particular, Argentina and Bolivia and Chile, the rulers from the military dictatorship era are still there and they're still in control. And so much attention, I think, is focused on the president and not enough on the militaries, especially Latin America and the Caribbean. We know that the armed forces usually determine a lot of what happens. We saw in Bolivia in 2019 what happened, right? If when you don't restructure the army and clean house and get rid of some of the fascists who were in power during Operation Condor, they're very much still there today. Chris, obviously for you as somebody, as a Chileno in the U.S., as somebody who whose family probably came to the U.S. because of Operation Condor and all of these different things, what has your experience been like connecting the state repression that you've seen, especially with political prisoners in the U.S., with what you've heard of and have studied back home in Chile?
Yeah, I think, well, my family actually like originally came here like when like beforehand, but then they couldn't go back. Um, you know, once the coup happened, they were like, oh, that's probably not a good idea. But
Yeah,
you know, yeah, it's interesting because like honestly, like studying the history of like Chile and like learning from a very young age, like about the coup and about what 9/11 means, very different sense. Um, very much informed like my politics and how I relate to contradictions that are within the United States empire. Um, you look at Operation Condor and you look at the other regime change operations that the CIA conducted just within like the decade of the 60s and then into the 70s and then continuing out the 20th century and into the 21st. You can see direct parallels with repression of revolutionary movements within the United States or within territories controlled by the United States government. Um, at the same time as Operation Condor, you have um, not necessarily COINTELPRO, but like the next program that once COINTELPRO was like exposed, then the FBI went into very similar programs right after that and continued to pursue people who were involved with and as covered in one of your in some of your previous episodes, people who were in the Black Panther Party, in the BLA, in Puerto Rican nationalist organizations, Chicano organizations, indigenous organizations in the United States. And so you have, with these massive waves of revolutionary movement, you also have the same motivation by empire, internally and externally, to not only destroy those organizations and those movements, but the memory of like the revolutionary traditions that carry them forward. That was the aim of like Pinochet in the United States. They terrorize people to the point where like it's not, they want the memory to not be inherited by the next generation. And the same thing was very much done within the United States as well. One of the stated aims of COINTELPRO was to prevent future generations from basically having any kind of revolutionary consciousness. And in that sense, part of it is to recolonize people who had risen up and taken part in the anti-colonial process.
Yeah, no, I think it's crazy, and a lot of the tactics are one and the same. And one thing I like to bring up to people is that a lot of this was under both Democrat and Republican presidents. A lot of people like to make the distinction. They're like, "Oh, the Democrats are the good guys. Biden would never do." And it's like we look at the president. Who were the presidents during Operation Condor? Lyndon Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Gerald Ford. Carter, who's always upheld and heralded as some peace-loving guy. There's like the Jimmy Carter Center for Peace. Meanwhile, he's sending money to death squads and right-wing military dictatorships. And of course, Reagan. And this is bipartisan support for U.S. imperialism, for Operation Condor in South America. And I think one of the things that I think is important when talking about this is images. This is one image of a soccer stadium in Chile that was turned obviously from a soccer stadium to somewhere that people, leftist communists, people like us, even having this conversation right now, would be brought here to be murdered in front of everybody. Here you have the soldiers with their rifles, and you have onlookers checking to see what's going on, and a lot of times friends and family. Some really fucking crazy shit that is insane. The torture methods and tactics, especially of the Pinochet regime, insane stuff. And the U.S. was heralding him as some pro-democracy freedom fighter. And these kind of images, I mean, turning a soccer stadium into a torture center, into a mass murder location, it's just fucking nuts. And another image I wanted to share is this is an image of right-wing propaganda from Chile. Some of the anti-communist groups that Bruno was talking about: Escuela Única, Partido Único, Empresas del Estado, Esclavitud Comunista, todos contra la Escuela Nacional Unificada para defender a nuestros hijos. And basically saying, opposing the unified public educational system, defending our children. And it has a monster with the hammer and sickle on the head with stuffing a kid into their pocket. So some of the early anti-communist propaganda that goes, way back, throwback. Another image that I want to share, kind of talking a little bit about some of the other main figures. One of the most fucking egregious actors of the Operation Condor is this guy that we're looking on the screen. This guy, his name is Nicolaus Barbie, and he is also known as the Butcher of Lion. And he was a Nazi. He was a Nazi from Germany who basically murdered, tortured, and killed communists, leftists, all sorts of people in France during World War II. He personally tortured a lot of people and also oversaw the mass murder of people in concentration camps. And this is kind of where you have the intersection between Operation Condor and Operation Paperclip, which is really fascinating to me because this is one of the more unknown elements of U.S. imperialist history, where the U.S. brokered a deal as part of Operation Paperclip with Nazis to give them passage to Latin America, in particular to South America. And this guy, Klaus Barbie, the guy we're looking at, is one of them. He went to Bolivia, where in Bolivia, his new job was to teach them how to kill communists, teach them how to kill indigenous peoples, union activists. And he went to La Paz. He played a major role in the Bolivian coup led by Luis Garcia Mesa in 1980 that implemented a Operation Condor right-wing military dictatorship, tortured people, especially indigenous peoples in Bolivia. So here you have an actual example of the U.S. helping actual Nazi go to Bolivia, one of the most indigenous nations in the hemisphere, to murder and torture and kill indigenous communists in Bolivia. So Klaus Barbie, man, I mean, if you get a chance, look at his history. Like, this guy is a piece of shit. And he is this is what you're not going to hear in your U.S. history class, right? It's all about human rights and democracy. And also Alfredo Stroessner in Paraguay, another country that was impacted by Operation Condor. He was somebody who, he came into power in 1954, much earlier, but he basically stayed in power until 1989. He was heralded as a democracy fighter. They never called him a dictator, obviously, because he bowed down before U.S. imperialism. And in Paraguay, which also has a large indigenous community, especially the Guarani people, Guarani nation, Stroessner was responsible for a lot of mass murders and death. So I just wanted to kind of share that because I think it's really important to talk about that. Here's another clip giving some more overview of some of the key facts and figures. Now talking a little bit about Chile, focusing on the coup, what happened, and we'll talk a little bit about the impact of the coup.
Lastly, in Chile. Chile was of particular interest to the United States. Let's go back a few years. In 1970, the leader of the Communist Party was trying to win the power of government fair and square for democratic elections. Something that had never been done before, but right now it seemed like he was actually going to win. And this posed a unique challenge for the White House. Assistant Secretary William D. Rogers 6 weeks before the election. After all we've said about the elections, if the first time a communist wins, the US tries to prevent the constitutional process from coming into play, we will look very bad. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, the president's view is to do the maximum possible to prevent an Allende takeover, but through Chilean sources and with a low posture. But then on election day, this telegram reached the White House. The subject, Allende wins. An emergency meeting was held between President Nixon, Kissinger, and their intelligence chiefs. Their notes say, 1 in 10 chance perhaps, but save Chile. 10 million available, more if necessary. Full-time job, best man we have. Make the economy scream. The United States had about $1 billion invested in the country, and Chile owed them $1.5 billion. Relatively, they had very little capital at risk. But Chile meant much more than that. You already know how this story ended with a coup and a dictator taking power, with the support of the United States being disputed. In a report that was first published in 2004 and last updated in 2011, they identified almost 30,000 victims of illegal detention and torture under Pinochet. That the government of the United States was friendly with the Chileans was no secret. One conversation that illustrates this dynamic particularly well is between Assistant Secretary William D. Rogers and Chile's foreign minister at the time of the dictatorship. They are talking about an investigation into human rights violations that the Chilean government had recently denied access. Rogers says that his view on the question of human rights is on 2 levels. One is that it's a total injustice, because nobody goes around making statements about what is going on in Kampala or in the Central African Republic. In other words, if the world doesn't care about those human rights violations, why would they care about them in Chile? He adds that he would be in great trouble when this is leaked to the papers. His other issue with helping Chile's government is that the present conditions are challenging, which is likely a reference to the investigation and the negative attention in the press at that time. But the secretary's tone is overall very friendly. He adds that anything to alleviate that situation and in a somewhat visible way would be enormously helpful. This would make it easier for the United States to support Chile at this moment. The foreign minister responds that any alleged violations are absolutely false and that he's absolutely convinced in his own conscience that they are not taking place. This amicable relationship quickly became subject to public scrutiny when the violence against civilians reached North America. A few years after Pinochet took power, he assassinated Orlando Letelier in Washington, D.C. Letelier was an outspoken critic of Pinochet, and he served as the Minister of Defense under Allende. The CIA reported to have convincing evidence that President Pinochet personally ordered his intelligence chief to carry out the murders, and that Pinochet decided to stonewall on the US investigation to hide his involvement. A second incident occurred in Santiago de Chile in 1986. 2 protesters were arrested and deliberately burned alive. One of them died, and he had a Canadian nationality. The other was a Chilean national, and she survived the attack. The Chilean government said that they burned themselves by accident, but the public believed otherwise. The intel from the United States confirmed that eyewitnesses had testified that army personnel was clearly involved.
Crazy, crazy stuff. They burned themselves on accident. Who believes that bullshit? But because it is a government that is in favor of U.S. imperialism, in favor of neoliberalism and capitalism, then they'll believe all of their nonsense. I do want to share, before I pass it to Compañero Bruno, this is the evil genius. He looks like the bad guy in every movie. Dr. Evil himself, Milton Friedman, wearing a bow tie and some corny glasses. This is the guy that is responsible for the economic packages that were intended to make Chile's economy scream. The shock doctrine, as some have called it. This guy is Satan himself. Look at his face. I mean, he looks like, oh man. So I just wanted to share that. But Bruno, a lot of the language that they have in those documents, I always find those topics really interesting because it's like you have these internal conversations about how they're going to carry out these plans. And a lot of times when you say that to people, especially liberals, they're like, what are you, some kind of conspiracy theorist? And it's like, no, like they have these conversations in leaked documents, right? This happens all the time. Do we see something similar happening today with Operation Condor, especially when we're talking about how fearful they are of communists and the communist left?
So something similar. Well, I would say the most similar thing would be that, well, in the most recent elections in Chile, in the kind of final stage of elections, because here in Chile we have 3 stages of elections. The final one is done between 2 candidates. Both Gabriel Boric, who was the candidate for the kind of left-wing Frente Amplio, he went to go visit Washington before the final round of elections. And so did the ultra-right candidate, Jose Antonio Cast, who I remembered because you were talking about, what was his name? Klaus. And well, Klaus wasn't the only ex-Nazi that came to South America to escape his war crimes. There's also the Cast family. Jose Antonio Cast's grandfather is a Nazi war criminal who came to Chile to escape his war crimes. And his family was part of Patria y Libertad, Fatherland and Liberation, and they collaborated with the military junta to especially crush labor organizers in the countryside, peasant labor organizers. And I have a book on with some faces of some of the victims of that of the repression. Some of these are could be even victims of the caste family. And well, you know, it's sort of a myth to say that it was just 50 years ago. Forget it. This guy who directly, his family was directly linked with this operation. He was very close to winning last elections. No, Gabriel Boric won by 10 more points, but there was still like 40% of the vote that still went to caste.
Wow.
So he could win next elections. Maybe it all depends on how it goes for Boric. And I remember someone here in the comments commented, Operación Condor equals NED. Well, here's a bit of some juicy information. There's a bit of a strange relationship that Boric had. His ex-girlfriend is still an active member of the National Endowment for Democracy. Now, according to him, like they already finished, but according to him, like he says, no, it doesn't matter. We're still on good terms, and that's a bit suspicious for me. It's like, for example, for if you were to be someone from the Pentagon and you were to hear someone like, oh, their ex-girlfriend was part of the KGB, and for them to say, don't worry, we're still on good terms, we're friends, don't worry about it.
Right.
That's the thing, and that's something that sort of rings a lot, that would started to ring a lot of alarm bells for me during the elections. And you can see Gabriel Boric, even though he has his famous saying, his narrative that he condeno la violencia venga donde venga. I condemned violence. It doesn't matter where it comes from, but he tends to condemn more the violence of the tyrannies that are against the U.S. than other ones. Sometimes he'll throw in Israel in there as well, but you know, he kind of focuses on that. He's very good friends with who is it, the Chamorros in Nicaragua as well.
Yep.
And just recently, in the case of the Ukraine war, the special operation that's going over there, Boric sent millions of dollars that are in a fund that is supposed to go to poor and homeless people. He sent it to the Ukrainian government.
Wow.
And it's not like we just have bags of money just you know, just lying around. You know, he's actually supposed to be his whole campaign is supposed to be surrounded around various reforms that are not cheap. They're actually quite expensive. So what is he doing, throwing money at the Ukrainians at this point? You know, it's very suspicious. Just and well, I would say some of those are the big things that still hand over to today. Kind of going back to another point, thinking about another German name. Now that I remember the name of the person that I couldn't remember before, is who was very important in the Pinochet secret police. His name is Miguel Krasnov. I forget because it's a sort of, I forget some German names. And this guy, he a couple of years ago, he had a special homage enacted to him by a branch of the Chilean armed forces, and he's actively now in Punta Peuco, in this luxury prison that I talked about. So this all a lot of this stuff is still going on. Another thing that I wanted to mention there, you showed a video of that's Miguel Krasnov. He was actually taught.
He looks like, wow.
He was actually taught in the School of the Americas, as well as Miguel Contreras, who we showed before. Those two were in the School of the Americas. They were both taught there. And going back to the point that you had shown a clip of the that's a national stadium that you showed. I would go regularly to go see, the Chilean national soccer team. I would see them play with Colombia, Uruguay, and other teams. And they have a special part of the stadium where they kept the seats just like how they were in 1973. And above there, it says something like a people without memory, or a people without a future. So they're still in. Also, for any game that's near the day of the 11th of September, players will go and they'll give bouquets of flowers to those seats, which are always empty, because those are for the people that didn't come back. And I also remember that just last week, it was last week or so, there was some kind of construction going around the stadium, and they found bones.
Wow.
So literally, there's the bones of the victims of Operation Condor are still being dug up till today. And well, many of those families are kind of waiting to see, well, is this my husband? Is this my grandpa? Is this my uncle? Is this my brother?
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. No, to see that is insane. And there's so many monuments in Chile to this day that remain, that are commemorating the history of violence and also resistance. I think is insane to see how people are still finding bones. Chris, one thing I wanted to ask you is that you're somebody who we talk about all the time, how in many ways liberals can be even more anti-communist, more neocon than some of the right-wingers in the U.S. in particular, when it comes to anti-communism, especially in academia. By the way, Chris, are you in Bopster now in NYU?
Yeah, I am. I was in study room, but my time ran out on that. So
I recognize it, man. I spent so many nights there cramming for finals, drinking black coffee and smoking cigarettes outside of Bopes. So I definitely recognize there's probably some liberal hipster at the library now, like Russian imperialism, writing some thesis like Russian imperialism and Chinese imperialism. So like that's one of the things that I find interesting is like even today in the U.S. in particular, a lot of the liberals tend to be more anti-communist. They want war against Russia. They believe the whole pray for Ukraine bullshit. And in many ways, like I feel like the liberals and the Democrats are kind of like more dangerous than the right, the quote unquote right, because they have the veneer, the appearance, the aesthetic of being on the left. And I've heard many people critique Boric as well. Boric, or I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced, but I wanted to ask
Boric
you.
Here.
Boric.
His name is actually Croatian, and his family came from Croatia after World War II, which is also suspicious because during World War II, there was a lot of Nazi collaborators in Croatia carrying out a war in Yugoslavia against the Serbians. So, the time that they came, and the fact that Boric is actually a name of a lot of money. They're one of the old families here, and a lot of the Croatian population here in Chile, a lot of them also have family with Nazi collaborators. Here, the number one billionaire here, the richest man in Chile, Luksic, Alejandro Luksic, his grandfather was a member of the Ustaše, the people that carried out part of the Holocaust. It was one of the parts of the Holocaust that was one of the most violent. So much so that when Heinrich Himmler went to go visit one of the concentration camps over there in Croatia, when he walked in, he instantly vomited because they were just killing babies, just smacking them against tables. So that's how sick they were, and that sort of leaves a lot of suspicion for Boric.
Definitely. I think honestly, man, like since he came out and he was talking shit about Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua and all this. In my opinion, I feel like he's controlled the opposition. But just to kind of wrap up here, because we have hit the hour mark, and it's been really great talking to you guys. We'll start off with Chris, and then we'll finish off with compañero Bruno. Chris, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on Boric, and also how this ties into the broader liberal anti-communism.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. When you have a country that is so fascist like the United States, and then you have the United States helping create those same conditions in other countries, when you have that political culture that is that fascist, and the fact that you have destroyed the left, and it's very difficult to actually have folks that have principled revolutionary positions, and so everything becomes very easily co-opted by quote unquote progressives. And so like the most left that you're going to get, with Boric is maybe like his few reforms that he wants to propose within the country. But even compared to like other folks who could still be defined as like maybe social democrats, but still have actual principles, like AMLO, like who defended Evo, who defended Venezuela, who defended, all these other countries in Cuba. You don't see that with Boric, and you don't see that with certain other folks as well. I mean, I had one student, one classmate of mine ask me, I was like, oh, well, what's the left like in the United States? And I'm like, well, it's hard to really say that it exists, and I think, again, one of the lasting legacies of Pinochet is the fact that the organizational capacity that was around when Allende was, came to power, that's not there anymore. Now you have, in a lot of cases, liberals taking advantage of popular mobilizations, and with these sorts of, they don't have the same revolutionary strategies or principles that was more commonplace when you can trace that tradition of revolutionary organizing. And I think there's a similar problem in other countries, including the United States, as a result of that massive repression that happened in the late 20th century.
Most definitely. And all the NYU liberals crunching their granola, they're going to be like so pissed off right now that you're giving away their secrets. The latte leftists drinking their soy lattes at NYU, writing about Russian imperialism. They're going to be pissed off. But no, that's very true, man. I mean, I think from the beginning, he was always very suspicious. And again, right, this is one of those things where if you bring it up to a lot of people, they're like, oh, you're crazy.
He's a student activist.
Conspiracy theory. Yeah, he's a student activist who came out of nowhere. And I don't know, I think like Bruno said, like there's a lot of weird missing pieces about his life and his family that we don't exactly know about.
Yeah.
But Bruno, to finish off, man, give us your thoughts on Boric. Where is the left in Chile today? And what is it like to be a communist in Chile today?
Well, in Chile, actually, I wanted to mention that I actually met Boric in person. You could, talking about how he would be a student activist. Well, there is some truth to that. Like years back when I got into university and I started going to protests, I actually met the guy. He would go to the street and you could just go up and talk to him, and he would answer anyone. You could give him that much merit, because then like the questions you would ask, the things that you would ask, like he would give some answers that would be kind of weird and vague, or that simply just didn't add up sometimes. He gave the time to answer, but and the thing is that he comes, I know this because I'm here and I actually saw the guy on the street. Boric comes from a political strain here in the left, of kind of liberal middle class suburbanites, and many of them that kind of sometimes adopt some kind of Marxist kind of narrative, but not the whole thing. Many of them, for example, will say to you that imperialism is a thing of the past. The coup was 50 years ago.
Wow.
Here I was laughing at here. You were saying that in the U.S. there's a latte left. In Chile,
course.
we associate them with a neighborhood, kind of well-off middle class neighborhood called Ñuñoa. So we call them the
That's
Ñuñoa left, the Ñuñoainos.
Ñuñoa left. That's hilarious.
So it rhymes with ñoño, which is sort of like wimpy.
Right. Ñoño, the Ñuñoa left.
Yeah,
it's international, man. The soy latte liberals is international.
Yeah, so basically they have, for example, a lot of these sections of this of the Ñuñoa left, they have adopted a lot of the image of Allende, for example. So that's what you'd see Boric, for example, when he walked into the presidential palace, he first saluted the statue of Allende that we have right in front of that palace, and then he went into the palace, which for the media was like, oh my gosh, it's the coming of communism in Chile. It's like that photo, like against Allende's public education reforms. Like, oh no, our poor children, everything all the shelves will be empty and blah blah blah. Well, that hasn't really happened, but neither. Well, none of that has happened. He hasn't become a communist. Nothing has come off the shelves, but nothing has gotten better either. It's been a bit of the same. Also, a lot of his responses, for example, to the many recent protests, because some context here. In Chile, we have a welfare check for poor students from the ghetto that can't make ends meet, and the check is to give them food. It's called the Junaep. So the Junaep hasn't been actualized in more than a decade. The last time that they rose up the Junaep to make it stick with inflation was when there was still Blockbuster. So there was a big protest here in Chile. There were some kids that got shot by police. The cartel, some members of the cartel also attacked a lot of kids. I was there. There was a lot of kids that got stabbed. One kid got his head crushed by 7 cartel members attacking him. And Boric, being having his origins in the student movement, his response was that, okay, I'm gonna raise the Junaeb by $5. And that was it. And $5 extra doesn't do anything. It doesn't help kids, pay for their lunches,
Right.
Chilean
pesos. By the way, sorry to interrupt you. For people who are unaware of the way Chilean pesos work, like it's not like $5. Like 5 Chilean pesos it's like compared to 5. It's like nothing. It's like pennies compared to relative to the currency, right?
Yeah, and it still doesn't adjust to the inflation right here. So so the Junaeb is going around like 36,000 pesos, but what you actually need are 47,000 pesos. So by the end of the month, like, kids are just scratching by and just trying to make ends meet. One of our slogans is a puro pan, a puro té, así no tiene la Junaeb. So for a lot of kids, it's just they're just making it by like buying single packets of tea and getting one slice of bread.
Oh my god!
So that's how things are like here. Boric didn't answer he didn't make a proclamation against the police that shot against students that were middle schoolers, that were minors. Nor did he say anything about the cartel, in which there was also a video circulating around that one of the cartel members was stopped by police, and the police released him and directed him to go talk with the media, with live television. So there was on live television open collaboration between police and cartel.
Wow.
And he didn't say anything about that. And they were attacking students, middle schoolers, high schoolers. So so much for being a man of his roots. That's what I have to say.
He reminds me of like the Chilean AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like coming out with this Marxist rhetoric, leftist, socialist, and at the end of the day, opposing all actually existing socialism around the world, supporting fascists in Ukraine, supporting fascists in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. To me, when he came out, I tried to give people the benefit of the doubt, but it wasn't long before I was like, all right, this guy Boric is very suspicious and unfortunately is promoting. I think, in my opinion, I think liberals like him are even more dangerous in their anti-communism because they're approaching it from this fake left or this fake progressive appearance. Like Chris said earlier in the chat, like the democracy, he had a great comment. Democracy now leftist love Allende because he was overthrown. None of that same allegiance is given to actually existing revolutionary processes. Most definitely, I couldn't agree more. Comrades, it's been really great speaking with y'all. It's been an hour and 11 minutes. I'd love to have y'all back on soon to talk more about Latin America and communism and Chile and all other operations, because Operation Condor is just one of many horrible fucking operations by the U.S. Operation Paperclip, MK Ultra, COINTELPRO. There's so many others. Me and Chris did an episode the other day about COINTELPRO. So it's crazy, but it's not taught in schools, and this is why we're talking about this now, because some people may not even have heard of Operation Condor when it happened, and the fact that tens of thousands of people died. Peace out, comrades. I really appreciated having you on. Bruno, it's been a pleasure as always, brother. And you too, Chris. Good luck with the liberals at NYU. They're going to probably beat you up after with their yoga mats after you get out the library. It's been a real pleasure, fellas. Thank you, everybody, for watching, listening. We're going to go out to some more revolutionary music from Chile. Peace, everybody. Have a great day.
Son los pobres del mundo que avanzan, como ejemplo tienen a Vietnam. En los campos, caminos y pueblos ya se ven las banderas surgir. Son banderas con el rojo y negro, patria o muerte, vencer o morir. Trabajadores al poder, 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 trabajadores al poder. No es esclavo el hombre que lucha por unir a la clase social, que destruya el poder de los ricos, que nos roba a diario el pan. En la lucha contamos las horas por ciento.